Hello and welcome to the ECSU Competitors Conference seminars. My name is Greg Morgan, I'm from the UK, and this seminar is How Do I Explain My Christian Hope? So far, we have talked about pray, stay, say. That in this time of change where for some of us sport has stopped, for others sport is restricted, how do we stay in the lives of our sports friends? How do we continue to make disciples for Jesus Christ in sport? And this seminar in particular is talking about how do we then share the good news of Jesus with sports people when the situation is now so different, where we're not so regularly in contact with them, where we're not able to share life as freely as once before. I'm going to have a couple of guests join me as we look at this topic, and we're going to be digging into the Bible, to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. So please make sure you have a Bible accessible so that you can look at it with me and we can dig in it together. But first, let me bring in Thomas. Welcome, Thomas. Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thomas, tell us where you're from and what sport you are involved in.
I'm from Sweden, southern part of Sweden, and I'm involved in football, soccer, as a coach. Now I'm a coach, and I've been playing soccer for many years before, but that was a long time ago. I'm getting old.
I know how that feels. And Thomas, you've been involved in football, as you said, for a long time, both as a player and as a coach. And you have been involved in sport as a believer, as a Christian. How have you found being a Christian in a non-Christian world of football?
For me, it has been, I mean, of course, it's tough because in Sweden, it's a secular country, and most of the people, they don't have a belief in anything else. They are well off with money and they have work and so on, so they don't really need God in a sense. But the thing is, I have found that they really respect my faith because they can see my life, that it's not just words. They can also see the deeds in it. So I must say that they have shown a lot of respect of being a believer and being a believer 100%.
Okay, oh, that's really encouraging, isn't it? How about when you have talked about what they believe and maybe even try to talk about Jesus and their need to respond to him? How does that work in your culture?
Yeah, once again, it's not like a normal talk with people in Sweden, but I find that the best time is when life is trembling, when things are happening in their lives. Then I get the opportunity to share, and they tend also to come to me and start to talk about things because they know that I believe in something greater. So therefore, like in daily life, and to bring in the conversations to talk about Jesus and so on, it's kind of tough because I'm not that gifted in that either. It's not my skill to get it to sound like as a natural part of it. So it's it's when life is trembling, then you get a lot of opportunities.
That's really interesting. We're going to look a little bit about that later on when we talk about how is it our brilliance that brings people to Jesus, or is it the message itself? Thomas, just one question before we keep moving through. You're in a different situation now. Sweden, different from a lot of Europe in the fact that you've been able to keep playing in a restrictive way. How's it been staying in the lives of those that you coach over this period of the coronavirus?
Can you say that question again? Sorry, I didn't hear.
How have you been able to stay in the lives of those you coach during the coronavirus? What's it like in Sweden?
Yeah, I mean, in Sweden, we are a little bit different from the rest of the world, kind of, because we don't have so much of restrictions. We can continue, because I'm now coaching girls like 14, 15, 16 years old, and we are allowed to meet and do practices as usual. We can't meet in the change room and so on, but we can meet and we can play. So life is kind of continue as normal for us as a soccer team, but we're not able to play any games. That's the sad part.
And have you found that during this time, the players and perhaps parents and other coaches have been asking some of the bigger questions of life? How's the virus affected their viewpoint?
No, not within the team, but then at my working place, then we've had discussions about, we now in a situation where we've never been before. We are so well off in Sweden, but things are trembling. And then, of course, what do we build our lives upon? So those kind of questions come up.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you, Thomas, for sharing with us. We're going to come back to you later on and hear a little bit more about what it's like in Sweden. We're also going to head to Portugal and find out what it's been like in Portugal too. But why don't we open the Bible together now? If we look at this question, how do I explain my Christian hope to other sports people? So this is the passage we're looking at, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 1-5. Let me read it to you, and then we're just going to ask 2 questions of the passage. It says this: when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but God's power. I don't know if you noticed as we read that passage that there's some nots and some do's. I'm going to pick up on those. What did he not do, Paul, as he spoke about Jesus? You see, Paul is writing to the Corinthians, a church in Corinth, and there's been some difficulties. Paul went to them originally and he shared the good news of Jesus, and they put their faith in him. A church was formed. But after Paul left to move on to share Jesus elsewhere, others came into the church and they started to say, hey, look, Paul was weak. He wasn't a good communicator. Listen to our message. Our message is much more impressive, much more powerful. And Paul is writing back into the situation and he is saying, no, it wasn't about me. It was about the message. So have a look at the passage. Look at what he did not do as he spoke about Jesus. First one, verse 1, when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom. So it wasn't based on Paul's brilliance. His message wasn't dependent on him. Look then at the next verse. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you with weakness, with great fear and trembling. And in verse 4, we have the next do not. Next not. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words. So it wasn't his brilliance as a communicator, verse 1, or his intellect, his ability to understand great concepts and communicate those clearly, verse 4, not with wise and persuasive words. And then right down in verse 5, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom. There's the third not right in there in verse 5. What was his purpose? Well, his purpose wasn't that they were intellectually puffed up, that their faith was based on their understanding. No, he wanted their faith to be dependent on God's power. So 3 nots in this passage. It's not with his brilliance, his eloquence, not with his wisdom and persuasion of words, and not resting on human wisdom, faith resting on human wisdom. So what did Paul do? And what can we learn from that? Well, have a look at the passage again. Verse 2, he spoke about Jesus Christ and him crucified. He spoke about Jesus. He was the central figure of what Paul communicated. And he pointed to his death on the cross, his death and his resurrection. Now, we see in this letter that to the Greek intellectuals, this was just foolishness. How can God come and die for humanity? And the Jews were not impressed. They just didn't see any value in this message. But Paul resolved to be humble and to speak of Jesus himself and him crucified. So that's the first thing that he did. And then he said, my message, verse 4, preaching were not wise and persuasive words. Why did he say this way? Look at verse 3, he says, I came to you with weakness, great fear and trembling. Thomas said this just a bit earlier, didn't he? That, hey, he doesn't feel like he's natural at speaking about Jesus. And for so many of us in our changing rooms with the players that we play alongside, it doesn't feel like our gifting or our natural ability to be able to speak of Jesus freely and cleverly and clearly. And yet Paul says, hey, that's not what it's about. Yes, we come in weakness and great fear and trembling, but it's the message of Jesus Christ that is the power. And finishes brilliantly, doesn't it? But with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. As we proclaim Jesus Christ and Him crucified, God opens people's eyes to see Jesus for who He really is, and to see their great need for Him, and that He has met that need through His death on the cross, and that His resurrection back to life proves that He is the one who can pay for our greatest need, which is our sins to be forgiven, and that His death and resurrection prove that He is God Himself and there is life beyond this life. That is the great hope of the Christian faith, and that is what we want people to know. It's tempting, isn't it, to try and be clever and try and think of ways to communicate intellectually with our teammates, and to think, oh, if I just tell them about Jesus and the cross, they're going to think I'm a fool. But here Paul says, no, that is the message we are to tell. We are not to fall into the trap of trying to be wise and intellectual, but to present Jesus Christ simply and faithfully, because in that message is God's power. And through that power, people come to a saving faith in Jesus. So hopefully that's a real encouragement to you. Hopefully that gives you the deep breath moment of, oh, the message is simple. It's not about my brilliance. It's about the message of Jesus. And through that, God's power comes and it brings people to God in faith through Jesus. So let's have a chat about that with our guests and think through what does that look like in the context of sport. So bring Thomas back in, Mateus. Mateus, tell us where you're from and what your sport is.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Portugal, more exactly in Lisbon, and I play American football. I'm a quarterback.
Great. And how long have you been in your team, Mateus, in Lisbon?
So for how long I've been in my team?
Yeah.
I've been playing with the Crusaders it's going to be my 6th season right now.
Okay. So you've got to know the guys that you play with pretty well over that time.
Yeah. We kind of build a bond that goes beyond the playing field.
Great. And have you had opportunities during your time as a player and during training to speak of Jesus and point them to the hope you have? What's that like? Tell us about that.
So there's opportunities rise I won't say like every day, but they are there, especially in my case and on my team's case. It comes most on locker room talk. So especially after practice or before practice, when we are just on the locker room getting ready or getting out of practice. So there's a lot of opportunities that rise there because people just use those 15 minutes to talk about everything that has been going through their lives throughout their week, or a special situation that they might be going through. So locker room is like the place, at least in my case, where those conversations happen the most.
Okay, great. And as you're in those conversations, how do you move from talking about life and sport and situations that they're in to talking about your faith? How does that happen for you? Give us an example of what that's been like.
Okay, so for me, in my case, personally, they know that I'm a Christian. It's something that is out there. Everyone knows it. And number one, the way I try to do it is I try to pick it up from a topic that makes sense. So, for example, the most recent one that I can recall, it was about marriage, because we were discussing a situation, or a colleague of mine was discussing a situation regarding him and his girlfriend, and they've been dating for a long time, close to 6-7 years now. And I just kind of pitched in like, what about marriage? Have you ever thought about that? And obviously, it is kind of hard to, because people will come at you with logic, or they will try to defend themselves with the logic, like, oh, it doesn't make sense. Why would I get married when we can just move in? Why marriage? And then I kind of just try and pitch in my perspective as a Christian and why I believe marriage is important. And that also gives me like a path to put Jesus in, and why I believe marriage makes sense and Jesus makes sense.
That's great. It sounds incredibly normal, doesn't it? It's not difficult. It's not super spiritual. It's just a normal conversation, but bringing in your faith through that. That's really helpful, Matthias. Thank you. Thomas, let's go to you, because it's very different being a coach, because you're not one of the team. How have you had a conversation? Talk us through a moment you had kind of crossed that pain line. You know that pain line where normal conversation about life and about what's going on, and then you feel in your heart the opportunity is there to speak about Jesus, and you've got a choice, haven't you? Do I cross that pain line and bring in my faith or not? How do you find that? And give us an example of what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I can give an example because I coach goals between 14 and 16, and it's quite sensitive to talk about faith with children in Sweden. And then after a practice, one of the girls came up and said that she had problems with her leg, and she told me that her foot was like 3 sizes smaller on the left side than on the right, and the leg was shorter, like a couple of centimeters. And there I felt I should pray for her. But then, of course, I couldn't do it there and then. And so I was praying about it. I was struggling with it, back home. And I really want to get the opportunity to do that. And then we had this game, and I could see that her mom was there. So, I mean, the whole thing just grew kind of. And I felt I have to speak to her mom in order to get the allowance to pray for her goal. So I walked up to her and told her to come, and I talked to the girl and explained to them. Then because I've seen that that's the best opportunities I have to talk about Jesus. Life is tough. You have problems, and I would like to pray for you because I know that Jesus has died for you. And I explained the gospel to them, and I pray. And it was really, I mean, it's of course it's a struggle when I do it, but afterwards it felt really good, and I've never had anyone being upset about that. They're really thankful. And now this girl, this was last year, she went to church to like confirmation, like alpha course for children in our church as well. And then I realized that her grandmother also was a believer. So that was really cool, and her mom was really happy about that. So, but that's the normal case for me, actually. To get into people's lives when the foundation is trembling and problems occur, then I would like to pray for them and share them about Jesus through that.
And that takes courage, doesn't it? I mean, you said earlier that it doesn't come naturally, and there's that moment where you know what you should do and the opportunity that's there. Yeah. You still have to do it. You still have to cross that line.
Definitely. And then also, I mean, many times I haven't crossed that line either. So I'm not the hero here, but it's the same when I was playing. Like you said, Matthias, in the locker room, then you have the talks there. And the same there, one guy came in, he was so upset because he tore his ligament in his knee. And he said, football is my life. I put everything into soccer, and this now, what's going to happen? And in order to tell them, my soccer is very important. And I want to be the very best. And I myself had severe injuries, but my faith in God and Jesus keeps me going, and it gives me hope. So I'm able to share that through those.
That's great. Oh, thank you. And Matthias, for you in Portugal, lockdown has been more severe than in Sweden. How have you had conversations with your team during this strange time we've been in?
Yeah. So as you said, and we've been locked down for a while now, and what happened, luckily for us as American football athletes, there are still a couple of events that were happening. So the NFL draft, for example, and the combine were some of those. And what we did as a team, we took advantage of those to just be together and spend some time together, and just really share life at that point while doing something that we would all do by ourselves either way. So why just not come all together and do it together? So pretty much those were the times where we were able to connect and talk a little bit again about what's going on, how we're feeling on these times, because I actually had a couple of teammates that were struggling a lot with this, like with the lockdown situation, and just really developing some kind of anxiety, severe anxiety and depression and so on. So yeah, those are the situations that sometimes come up. As I said before, it's just a matter of like really living life with your teammates and taking advantage of that. For me personally, maybe I should be a little bit more intentional with it, but I just try to be a part of their lives, like naturally, as I would with any other of my Christian friends, and just share my faith along the way with them.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And that's it, isn't it? That's what we're talking about. This is not some super spiritual task that has been set aside for brilliant people. It's normal people like us in our sports teams, having the courage to stay in their lives, to be part of their lives, to share our lives, and when the opportunity arises, to point to Jesus in a very natural and normal way. It does come with fear and trembling. We do have to cross the pain line, but it's the message of Jesus Christ that saves, not us and not our brilliance. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great to have you here. We're going to finish up now, and let me just give you the highlights to remind you of what we talked about before we come into our discussion group. We're talking about how do we explain our Christian hope in our locker room, and what we've been saying is, hey, look, it's simple because the message of the cross is simple. Point to Jesus, allow the message of the cross to impact your friends. Remember, it's not about your brilliance, it's not about your eloquence of speech or your wisdom. The message of Jesus Christ and him crucified. In a normal way, be normal. Pray, stay, and say in the lives of sports people. And when the opportunity comes, point to Jesus and allow God's power to change their lives. Take care. Bye-bye.